Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today. And if you're going to play a game and you want to win the game, it's best if you study the rules of the game so that you know, oh, here's my strategy I'm going to develop around those rules so that I can win the game. Well, we're talking about healthcare. And when it comes to the rules about healthcare, it's not that companies and doctors study the rules of the game. They can also influence the rules of the game through lobbying and through government. I just use that to lay the foundation for this headline, which I just read coming out of Virginia. With governor's signature, healthcare affordability bills become law. Well, that sounds like great news. We all want healthcare to be more affordable, right? Well, we're going straight to the horse's mouth here in Virginia. We have Mike Sharman. He's the general counsel for Share Healthcare, and he lives in Virginia. He's involved there. And so, Mike, it sounds like healthcare is going to be more affordable now in Virginia. But what's the real story? And you being a conservative, me being a conservative, we always look wearily at government's hand stirring the pot in private business. So let's talk a little bit about these new laws that have been passed in Virginia regarding healthcare affordability.
Well, picking up on your analogy of knowing the rules of the game, you wouldn't want only one team to set the rules. You just don't want only one team to set the rules, because guess who that's going to benefit?
Sure.
It's that team. So in Virginia, the team right now that's setting the rules are all Democrats. We have all three of our state elected officials, the governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, are Democrats. Our House of Delegates has a supermajority of delegates. The Virginia Senate has a majority of Democrats. So guess who's setting the rules? And they set it to favor their view of how government ought to be, their particular lobbying groups that they favor, etc. Then within that, there's a subset of Northern Virginia Democrats who are more progressive, it tends to be, but they're also very much controlled by the corporations and interests in their district, as you might think. So they're representing the concentration of hospital and medical monopolies that are in that area, which is a very high concentration. There are quite a few of the lobbying groups that are headquartered in Northern Virginia. A lot of the national corporations are headquartered in Northern Virginia. And so that's where the bulk of these bills that are said to be affordability bills are coming from. So just thinking of one, there's a bill that amended the requirements for the health carrier contracts that relate to prior authorization for prescription drugs. So you would think that would benefit the patient, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we're talking about affordability and you want to be benefiting the patient. But what that bill actually does and says it does is that previously there was a requirement that if you had a prior authorization for something, that prior authorization could not be revoked. You know, if you're told, yeah, go ahead and you can get these meds, well, then you can get those meds. Well, this allows, though, the bill that supposedly helps affordability for who, allows that prior authorization, that promise that you were given, it allows that to be broken by the insurance carrier. So I don't see how that helps the patient. There's another one that's on down coding. So people might have heard about up coding on medical expenses. So first, let's give a little foundation to coding. When the hospital, a doctor, any medical provider is submitting a bill, it will have a code, a CPT code. And there's about 64,000 of those codes that talk about the various medical procedures that are being done. And obviously, one procedure might have a variety of codes that might fit it. And as you might guess, doctors want to choose in hospitals, want to choose the most profitable one that they can that would actually fit.
Mm-hmm.
And as you might guess, the insurance company wants to bring it down. So this bill that has passed, and Governor Spanberger has signed it, would not allow an insurance company to downcode a bill without first going to the healthcare provider and asking why. Okay, at first blush, that sounds, well, that's good. Mm-hmm. We don't want them just to automatically downcode it without getting a question answered first about, well, Mr. Healthcare Provider, why'd you put that in? Well, think of the unintended consequences. One, that delays payment.
Yeah.
Who gets to hold the money while the payment's delayed? The insurer.
Mm-hmm.
And the insurer invests that money. And by the way, the insurance companies, the bulk of their profit does not come from the insurance premiums. It comes from the investments they make in real estate and mortgages, et cetera, that increase, that's their profit there. That's where they make the money. And so the longer they have float, the longer they're able to hold this money, the more money they have to invest. So this unintended consequence, let's say, or perhaps it's the intended consequence of this bill that says, well, you can't downcode without first asking the insurer. Well, that means you're allowed to hold it asking the healthcare provider. You're allowed to hold that bill, not pay it, while you are asking that healthcare provider, gee, why did you do this bill this way? And I can just tell you from what we do with Share Healthcare, you don't always get fast answers from a healthcare provider because they're like everybody else. They're busy. They're like everybody else. They're bureaucracy. The smaller the hospital, the faster your answers are going to be. The smaller the doctor practice, the smaller your answer is going to be. The larger the practice, the slower your answer is going to get. So anyway, they'll have float. And then if they don't get the answer they want, they're going to argue about it. And then that might go to arbitration, might go to court. In the meantime, the insurer holds on to that money. What we do know is that government intervention into private business rarely helps. It has all sorts of unintended consequences, as the one I just mentioned could be. But it just dislocates the negotiating power, the negotiating opportunities between private practitioners, private businesses. You know, I've mentioned before, big is bad. Whether it's big government, big business, big unions, there's definitely a place for government. There's definitely a place for business. There's definitely a place for unions. But the bigger they are, the more they just lumber around and knock things over that we would not want done. And the more power they throw around, and the more they use literally the bully pulpit. What we do want is free enterprise with transparency and truth, which is the thing that's really been missing. If these lawmakers in Virginia, whether they were Democrat or Republican, and these are definitely the Democratic thrust here, but if they really wanted to make healthcare more affordable, they would put in truth and transparency at every level. And that would take care of so much of the problem. Instead of, there's just all sorts of ways that you could think about what is the true bill? What are your true costs? Insurance company, what do you really normally pay on this type of procedure? On and on and on. Truth and transparency is what we need for a free marketplace. If the patient knows that you have two hospitals in your local community, 7 or 8 miles apart, and if you know that one has posted prices that they say this is what we're going to charge, and they're significantly less than the other, and yet the outcome is actually better, which would be part of your truth and transparency, then which hospital are you going to choose? I mean, that's what competition is about. That's what free marketplace ideas are about. And each of these bills that were passed, supposedly in the name of affordability, And we just showed how, well, affordable for who might be a big question. If we're just looking for truth and transparency, it will change the operation of the consumer, which is what we want, supposedly. And if you have good, educated consumers, you're going to, in the long run, have better businesses because they're going to work more efficiently, they're going to work better and more professionally, et cetera, to get that business.
I'm in agreement with the whole free market idea with the government as a safety net to keep everything from imploding, and then otherwise let the free market do its work. But you're representing Share Healthcare, and you kind of have your own little oasis, not totally separated, but somewhat separated from this mess.
Right. Well, Share Healthcare is a Christian ministry, and it's a medical ministry for Christians to help share one another's medical expenses, medically necessary medical expenses. So, like you said, we have this little oasis. We can't be completely separate. Just think of the biblical phrase: we're in the world, but we're not of the world. Mm-hmm. We can't change the fact that our members they have to go to a hospital if they need a hospital. So how is that different? Well, that's in the world. We can't change that part. They're going to have to go to a doctor who is either a OD doctor or an MD doctor. We can't change that. What we can do is give them choices. With Share Healthcare, freedom is our big issue. Medical freedom, financial freedom, and spiritual freedom, religious freedom. So how do we manifest that? Well, with medical freedom, we're not insurance, and we're not subject to the Affordable Care Act because we're not insurance. We're specifically exempt. Healthcare sharing ministries, which is what Share Healthcare is, are specifically exempt from Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. That means we don't have to do the things that they say are essential benefits, such as abortion. We don't share in abortions. Abortifacients, we don't share in those. We don't share in transgendering, et cetera, et cetera. So we're freed from those constraints that government has put on insurers, which, regardless of what the board of an insurance company wants to do, the Affordable Care Act says you must do these things. We don't have that. Our board are solid Christians who just want to do what the Lord wants them to do to help Christians share one another's medically necessary medical expenses. So that gives them, we have the freedom then to tell our members, okay, here's your network. This is the network that you're allowed to go to. Any licensed medical professional in the world. Go where you want to go. By the way, because of that, we have people in Canada who are members, because even though Canada has nationalized health care and you supposedly get free health care, well, they don't want to necessarily be a part of that, and so they're willing to share with what we have. We have, missionaries, et cetera. Of course, the bulk of our members are just folks in American communities all around. Our pricing gives people that financial freedom: $149 for a single, $249 for a couple, and this is per month, $349 for a family of four, and then $50 for each child after that. So you can see that's a huge amount of financial freedom that they have. And why are our prices so much less than what one would pay both with a health exchange and with health insurance? Well, because we aren't either of those. We aren't motivated by the principles and policies that motivate either of those. We're motivated by that third freedom I mentioned, spiritual freedom, religious freedom. When we have a problem individually as Christians, we're going to the Lord first. And then we're asking our family to pray with us also. Then we're asking our church to pray with us also. Then we're asking this community of Share Healthcare members to pray with us also. We're wanting to shape this ministry in its organization and in what it does in as biblical a model as possible. And it's just pretty simple. If you have a medically necessary medical bill, then that is shareable, and we send it out to the members to be shared, and that their $149, $249, $349 does it. But we're not just doing it for ourselves either. $10 of that $149 and $10 of the $249 and $10 of the $349 each month goes to the Soweto Academy just outside of Nairobi, Kenya. And that's an orphanage of about 500 to 800 children. It fluctuates at different times on the largest slum, on the edge of the largest slum in Africa. And these are kids that definitely would not have anything if it weren't for that. And it's Christian, even though some of the kids who are sent there or come there were from Islamic families. But it is definitely a Christ-centered academy. They also have a medical clinic. So those folks there pray for us. They pray specifically for Share Healthcare. They pray for the members. They pray for the staff. So because we are going to a more effective power, the power of Jesus, the power of the Holy Spirit, the power of God the Father, we are inexplicably able to offer to people a way of dealing with their healthcare expenses for $149, $249, $349 a month, which doesn't make sense to me even now. I see what bills come in, and we're just significantly lower, per capita than what the surrounding community would be. It doesn't make any sense other than there is a power that's looking out for us because we are trying as sincerely as we humanly can, with all our flaws and foibles, to follow him. Mm-hmm. And so we're protected.
As we wrap up our time here, Mike, talk a little bit about the fact that Share Healthcare is not some new thing that just came along.
No, healthcare sharing is really what the Bible has been telling us to do from the Old Testament and New Testament. Hebrews 13:16, which was written a couple thousand years ago, says, "Do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased." So let me repeat that. So that's an admonition that was written to the burgeoning churches, the newer churches coming out about 2,000 years ago. Hebrews 13:16, if your listeners want to write that down, Hebrews 13:16, "But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased." So that's how ancient this practice is supposed to be and had been up until the advent of insurance companies, which first were for merchant mariners in the 15th, 16th century, beginning that. Then we had the more widespread insurance beginning in the 18th and 19th centuries. Really didn't have much health insurance until the 20th century. And then when government began getting involved and setting the floor prices and telling things, dictating, until we began having the monopolies of hospitals and monopolies of who can provide medical education, et cetera, that's when health insurance took off to the extent that now many people's mortgage is lower than their monthly health insurance premium. So the advent of healthcare sharing ministries really started taking off in the 1980s. And what they were doing, these interdenominational ones, like Share Healthcare is interdenominational. If you're a Christian, whether Catholic, Protestant, Anabaptist, then you can share. Well, all of them really came either by the influence of the Anabaptist community, that is the Amish Mennonite community, or they're a direct descendant from them. And that's the case with Share Healthcare. Share Healthcare began from the old German Baptist Brethren, and that's the group that we are. And when the group that is the actual denomination, Old German Baptist Brethren, they began looking around and seeing what was going on in the surrounding world, and knew that they had something that the rest of the Christian world needed. And so they allowed us to expand it beyond that denominational, that very small denominational aspect, but their concept that we are to care for one another. We are brothers and sisters. We are one family. And so it's our obligation to share with one another when one is in need. And that had been, as I mentioned, that Anabaptist movement, that had always been a very core principle of those communities. And it's one that we can see we need now in our era. And so really every one of the healthcare sharing ministries either began because of influence of an Anabaptist community, or they actually are a descendant of one of those Anabaptist healthcare sharing ministries.
Another Bible verse that comes into my mind, I've been memorizing in Romans lately, and near the end of one of the chapters, it has a lot of little fragments of commands, really, and one of them, it says, distributing to the needs of the saints. Mm-hmm. And that Share Healthcare fits right into that. Yes, it does.
I mean, that theme, that philosophy, however phrased, goes through definitely the New Testament. And we've lost that. You know, when so often we say to one another, when we see a cultural problem, we say, well, they ought to do something about it. And typically we mean they, the government. Well, almost every time when we see something that needs correcting, we say they ought to do something about it. Well, actually, it's something the church used to do until we gave all the authority over to the government and gave all the money over to the government. Because in those eras that I was mentioning, which government was not as muscular, they weren't as muscular because they didn't get as much money. And so now they've just, each time they hear somebody say, well, they ought to do something about it, well, they pass a law and then charge you more for it.
Right.
The church needs to, even though there might be, let's say, a food stamp program available, the church needs to be telling their members, well, how about if we help supply that deficit in your family that you don't have? How about if the church, instead of saying, well, why not apply to Medicaid for that? Or why not go into healthcare exchange to get that expense? Well, how about them saying, well, we're going to help you with this. And there are some that, you know, like families with multiple special needs children. Well, they have expenses that are exactly what Medicaid is designed to help take care of. And that is what we want our government to be able to do. But there's nothing that says that our churches can't supply the needs that maybe are in the gaps that are there. And for those that really don't need government assistance, but they need a little assistance, which is the vast bulk, we need to be taking care of that. When people are, when there's a death or people are unemployed, the church needs to be more active in providing not just, you know, some lasagna to put on the counter, the kitchen counter for those that are in those problems, but actually helping them through that. And that help, of course, manifests itself in all sorts of different ways. Might be helping them with job training if it is an unemployment. Might be just, you know, mentioning in church. Being unemployed is not a shame-based thing, even though we feel that way. But it might be mentioning, okay, you know, so-and-so's company just moved out of here, and so they don't have a job. Everybody begin thinking of what cousins and brothers, et cetera, that you have who might have a company or a business that might be looking to hire the person with these skills. I mean, there's just so many ways in which the church needs to be active in caring for one another, bearing one another's burdens, not forgetting to do good and to share with one another, whether it's ideas or finances, as it is with Share Healthcare.
So how can people find out more about Share Healthcare?
Well, remember our name, Share Healthcare, so that's pretty helpful there, Share Healthcare. And go to sharehealthcare.com. Look around that website, write down your questions, and then call 1-844-SHARE-HC. 1-844-SHARE-HC. And again, that's sharehealthcare.com.
All right. Sharehealthcare.com and 1-844-SHARE-HC. That's Mike Sharman with Share Healthcare. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.